The city wept a cold, relentless rain, a gray deluge that turned neon signs into watery smears and sent pedestrians scurrying for cover like frantic beetles. Elara moved among them, a solitary figure, whose pace was not so much hurried as purposeful, her worn canvas grocery bag held close like a shield. Her world was not one of grand avenues and steel towers, but of cobblestone side streets and the warm, earthy scent of the community garden where she spent her days. It was a life measured in the quiet unfurling of leaves and the smudge of charcoal on paper. Her ambition, a quiet dream of one day offering that same creative solace to children who knew too much concrete and too little magic. It was in the bruised twilight, in the recessed doorway of a shuttered bookstore, that she saw him again. He was not merely a shape in the shadows. He was the man with the book, the one she had noticed on 3 separate occasions, each time struck by the quiet dignity with which he held his tattered copy of Meditations, as if it were a holy text. Tonight, however, that dignity was being beaten down by the elements. His shoulders were hunched against the chill, a thin jacket offering no more protection than tissue paper, and the cardboard beneath him was dissolving into a sodden pulp, a war waged within Elara. A brief, sharp conflict between the modern instinct for self-preservation and a deeper, more ancient call to compassion. The latter won effortlessly. She approached, her voice soft but clear against the drumming rain. "Excuse me?" He looked up, and she was struck anew by the clarity of his eyes, a blue that seemed to hold all the sky the storm had stolen. There was no plea in them, only a weary resilience. "Miss, do you need directions?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, rough with disuse, yet inherently gentle. The rest of her offer tumbled out in a single, earnest breath. "No, it is freezing. And you are soaked. Please, I live just around the corner. Come and get warm. Have some soup." She braced for refusal, for suspicion. He studied her face, his gaze a tangible weight, searching for the flicker of ulterior motive or condescending pity. He found only a profound and unvarnished concern. A slow, almost curious smile touched his lips, a subtle transformation that lit his features. "That is a remarkably kind offer. But I would not wish to impose upon your evening." "It is no imposition," she insisted, her conviction firming. "I would never forgive myself if I walked past and did not at least ask. I have a large pot of chili on the stove, far too much for one person to ever finish." A long moment passed, filled only with the sound of water hitting pavement. Then, a single, gracious nod. "Thank you," he said, gathering his few possessions with a natural economy of movement. "I confess, I am quite cold." He introduced himself as Leo, as they walked the short distance to her building, his presence both foreign and familiar beside her. Her apartment welcomed them with a wave of dry, fragrant heat, smelling of simmering spices and the faint, sweet scent of the jasmine plant on her windowsill. The space was a reflection of her, small, comfortably cluttered with books and stacks of her own canvases, every surface a testament to a life lived in curiosity and creation. A tabby cat lifted its head from the sofa, offering a slow, unimpressed blink before settling back to sleep. Elara busied herself with a quiet, efficient grace, finding him a thick, soft towel and an old, cable-knit sweater that smelled faintly of lavender soap. She served him a deep bowl of the rich, homemade chili, garnishing it with a generous hand of cheese and a spoonful of cool sour cream alongside a thick slice of crusty bread. He ate, not with voracious hunger, but with a focused appreciation that felt like a silent compliment to her cooking. The evening unspooled into something far beyond a simple act of charity. They spoke for hours, the conversation flowing as easily as the steam from their teacups. He was erudite and insightful, his knowledge of philosophy and history not just academic but deeply considered, woven into the fabric of his worldview. He in turn asked about her life, her work in the garden, the stories behind the paintings that leaned against her walls. He listened to her dream of the art studio, not with polite interest, but with a focused intensity that made her feel as though her aspirations were the most important subject in the world. He made her feel fascinating. Most people, she mused later, warming the teapot, they find it easier to just look the other way. "I understand it, but you seem different. You do not seem as though you belong out there. Like I belong on the streets?" He finished, his tone gentle, without a trace of offense. A faint blush touched her cheeks. "I did not mean to sound rude." "You have not been rude in the slightest," he assured her, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in the vibrant plants, the well-loved books, the evidence of a soul that created beauty. You saw a person, not a predicament. You offered warmth, not out of obligation, but from a genuine well of compassion. That, Elara, is a far rarer currency than you can possibly imagine. When he finally rose to leave, the rain had ceased, leaving the city glistening and quiet under a veil of mist. He thanked her again, his hand enveloping hers for a moment that stretched just beyond the conventional. His skin was warm, his grip firm. You have shown me more kindness tonight than I have known in a very long time, he said, his blue eyes holding hers with an unnerving depth. I will not forget this. Long after the door had closed behind him, Elara stood in the silence of her apartment. The air still seemed to vibrate with his presence. The empty bowl and teacup were not just remnants of a charitable act, but artifacts of a connection that felt significant and strange. She had offered shelter from a storm, little knowing she had just let a tempest into her life. The city, scrubbed clean and gilded by a timid morning sun, felt like a different world from the one shrouded in the previous night's storm. Elara moved through her Saturday routine with a familiar, comforting rhythm. The memory of Leo, the man from the rain, lingered in the quiet corners of her apartment like a haunting, pleasant fragrance. She watered her plants, the cat weaving figure eights around her ankles, and found herself pausing by the sofa where he had sat. The encounter felt both vivid and distant, a beautiful, bittersweet dream of human connection that was as transient as it was intense. She hoped he was somewhere dry, somewhere safe. The world, after all, was not kind to its lonely philosophers. The sharp, authoritative rap on her door, so alien to the usual friendly taps of her neighbors, shattered the morning's peace. Frowning, she opened it, her polite greeting dying on her lips. The man standing before her was both a stranger and intimately familiar. It was Leo, but every detail of him had been remade. The scruffy beard was gone, revealing a strong, clean jawline. The weary, rain-soaked hair was now expertly styled, strands of silver gleaming amidst the dark brown. He wore a suit of such impeccable, understated tailoring that it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin of pure authority. The kind, weary eyes were now sharp, penetrating, and held a power that was almost physical. He was no longer a man seeking shelter. He was a force presenting itself at her doorstep. Elara, he said, and his voice, though the same timbre, was now layered with a resonance of command that filled the small hallway. Her mind scrambled, trying to reconcile the two images. Leo, what is this? My full name, he stated, his gaze steady and apologetic, is Leopold Vance. The name landed not as a sound, but as a seismic event. Leopold Vance. It was a name etched into the foundations of the city, a byword for reclusive genius and formidable, almost mythical, wealth. He was the phantom captain of a global corporate empire, a man whose face was rarely photographed and whose private life was the stuff of intense speculation. The headlines from a month ago flashed in her mind, the shocking, failed coup within Vance Industries by his own board. He had vanished from the public eye entirely, and he had been reading Marcus Aurelius on her sofa. The billionaire, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. Her hand gripped the doorframe, the solid wood feeling suddenly insubstantial. The cozy sanctuary of her home now felt like a stage set. Naive and exposed before the sheer magnitude of who he was, he gave a single, slow nod, a gesture that acknowledged the absurdity and the truth of the situation. After my board attempted their rather dramatic takeover, I needed to disappear. To remember what reality felt like when it was not filtered through board reports and stock valuations. I needed to see people as they are, not as they present themselves to a man of my standing. His eyes, those piercingly clear blue eyes, swept over her face, taking in her shock with a look of profound understanding. For weeks I witnessed avarice, indifference, a chilling transactional view of humanity. And then I saw you. He took a single step forward, not invading her space, but making his presence, his focus, entirely inescapable. You did not see a CEO. You did not see a homeless man. You saw a person, cold and hungry, and you offered him your food, your fire, your time. You asked for nothing. You gave the only things that hold any true value. He reached into the inner pocket of his exquisitely tailored jacket and retrieved, not a business card, but a small, folded piece of drawing paper. He opened it carefully. It was her quick, impulsive sketch of a sunflower from her coffee table. I took this, he confessed, his voice dropping into a softer, more fervent register. A memento of the most honest night I have experienced in 20 years. He held her gaze, his intensity both thrilling and terrifying. I have not come here to repay you. Money is meaningless. I have returned to my company, to my life, and I find it is a gilded shell. I want you in it, not as an employee, not as a beneficiary of some charitable impulse. I want your heart. I want your spirit. I want that kindness to be the compass point of my world. Elara, I want only you. Silence descended, thick and heavy. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, it all faded into a dull roar. The man from the storm was gone, and in his place stood Leopold Vance, offering not a thank you, but a claim. He was not asking for another bowl of soup. He was asking for everything. And Elara, standing in the doorway of her simple life, felt the foundations of her world crack and begin to shift in ways she could never have imagined. The silence that followed Leopold Vance's declaration was a physical presence in the small hallway, thick and resonant. Elara could only stare, her mind a whirlwind trying to reconcile the humble philosopher with the titan of industry standing before her. His proposition was not merely an invitation. It was a fundamental rewriting of her reality. He did not wait for her stammered response, understanding the vertigo he had induced. With a final, lingering look that promised this was not an end, but a beginning, he turned and left, the sleek black car swallowing him whole and vanishing from her curb as silently as it had appeared. The following days passed in a surreal haze. Elara moved through her routines at the community garden, her hands in the soil, but her mind was a continent away. The memory of Leo, now Leopold, was a ghost haunting her every thought. She expected the encounter to fade into a bizarre anecdote, a strange dream she would eventually dismiss. It did not. Instead, a courier arrived on Tuesday morning, not with a bouquet of ostentatious roses, but with a simple, elegant box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a set of professional-grade horticultural tools, the steel blades gleaming, the wooden handles perfectly balanced. A small card was enclosed. It read, "For the hands that cultivate beauty." LVB. The gift was so thoughtful, so perfectly aligned with her world, that it unnerved her more than any jewel ever could. His courtship was a masterclass in quiet, persistent consideration. He did not bombard her with calls or demands. Instead, he wrote letters, not emails, but proper letters on heavy cream-colored paper, his handwriting, a bold, confident script. He wrote of philosophy, picking up the threads of their first conversation. But he also wrote of his day, of the sterile nature of his corporate battles, confessing that he found himself thinking of her sunlit apartment as a sort of sanctuary. He asked her questions about her art, her dreams for the studio, and his responses showed he had not only listened, but had truly heard her. Their first official meeting was not at a Michelin-starred restaurant, but at a quiet, book-lined cafe he had somehow discovered was her favorite. He was waiting for her, dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and dark trousers, a deliberate softening of his corporate armor. The conversation was not an interview nor a seduction. It was a continuation. They spoke for hours, the easy rapport from the rainy night rekindling and deepening. He listened to her with that same unnerving intensity, his focus, making her feel like the only person in the world. He was a man who commanded global attention with a single memo. Yet he sought her opinion on a philanthropic proposal with genuine, unfeigned interest. A week later, a man in a discreet suit appeared at the community garden's administrative office. He represented an anonymous donor who had been so moved by the garden's mission, and particularly by the proposed children's art studio, that he was providing a full, no-strings-attached grant to fund its construction and first 5 years of operation. Elara knew, with a certainty that stole her breath, that it was him. This was not a gift placed in her hands. It was a windfall bestowed upon her dream, allowing it to take flight without the weight of his name attached to it. It was the most profound compliment he could have paid her. This carefully orchestrated campaign was not designed to overwhelm her with wealth, but to demonstrate his understanding. He was not trying to buy her. He was trying to prove that he saw the very core of her, that he valued the person who grew things and created beauty. He was showing her that Leopold Vance, the billionaire, wanted to build a bridge to her world, not simply absorb her into his. With each thoughtful letter, each perfectly chosen gift, that spoke to her soul and not her vanity, and each conversation that fed her intellect and spirit, Elara felt the initial shock and resistance begin to melt away, replaced by a dangerous, blossoming hope. The lonely king of a glass and steel castle was courting the gardener, and she was, against all her instincts, starting to believe in the fairy tale. The transition into Leopold's world was not a sudden plunge but a gradual, guided immersion. He began by orchestrating small, controlled introductions, a series of evenings designed to acclimate her to the atmosphere he inhabited. The first true test was a private dinner at his penthouse, an area of glass and steel that floated high above the city's glittering grid. The view was a breathtaking, almost violent contrast to her street-level perspective. The silence up here was profound, a vacuum-sealed hush, broken only by the faint hum of climate control. A chef served a meal of exquisite complexity on porcelain so thin it seemed to weigh nothing. The conversation was polite, circling around safe topics, but Elara felt the immense unspoken weight of the space, the invisible barriers that separated this reality from the messy, vibrant life she knew. Leopold watched her closely, his eyes soft with understanding, as if he could read the slight tension in her shoulders. The next step was a charity gala. He presented her with a dress, not from a remote couture house, but from a designer known for working with sustainable fabrics and traditional artisans, another detail that proved his attentiveness. Yet, as she stood before the floor-length mirror, the emerald silk was undeniably beautiful, but it felt like a costume. Arriving on his arm, she was plunged into a sea of dazzling light and the low, predatory murmur of curated conversation. The women were sleek creations in jewels that could have funded her entire community garden for a decade. Their smiles were polished, their handshakes calculated. They asked what she did, and when she spoke of teaching children to paint with reclaimed materials, their eyes glazed over with a polite, uncomprehending boredom. She was a novelty, an exotic bird they could not quite categorize. She felt their gazes tracing the lines of her borrowed dress, assessing her, not as a person, but as an accessory to Leopold Vance. Whispers seemed to trail in their wake, not of malice, but of a profound indifference that was somehow worse. In her world, a person was defined by their character and their actions. Here, she was beginning to understand, a person was a portfolio of assets, connections, and influence. Her handmade ceramic jewelry, a point of personal pride, felt clumsy and naive next to the flawless diamonds surrounding her. Leopold was constantly at her side, a protective and proud presence. But even his formidable attention could not fully shield her from the sensation of being an imposter. In a gilded play, returning to her apartment after these forays was like coming up for air after being trapped in a beautifully pressurized cabin. The familiar scent of jasmine and old books was a balm. Her cat's insistent purr was a sound of genuine affection, not social obligation. She looked at her own paintings leaning against the wall, their bold, imperfect strokes full of raw emotion, and she felt a terrifying disconnect. The more she was drawn to Leo, the man who wrote her letters and funded her dreams, the more she feared the obliterating force of Leopold, the institution. He loved her spirit, her authenticity, but the world he was asking her to inhabit seemed designed to sand down every rough, real edge until she was as polished and placid as everyone else. She was falling in love with a man who cherished her garden, but she was terrified that his world would demand she pave it over to build a parking lot for his limousines. The gilded cage, for all its luxury, was still a cage, and she could feel its bars beginning to press against her, threatening the very soul he claimed to adore. The carefully constructed world of quiet dinners and cultural acclamation shattered with the abruptness of a stone through glass. The threat emerged not as a direct confrontation, but as a poison seeping through the pristine channels of media and corporate gossip. Elara first sensed it as a shift in the atmosphere around her. The previously indifferent glances at the grocery store now held a flicker of recognition, followed by a swift, judgmental turn of the head. A friend sent her a link to a society blog, its headline screaming about the mysterious muse of Billionaire Vance. The article was a masterwork of insinuation, painting her as a calculated opportunist who had somehow discovered the billionaire in his vulnerable, homeless disguise and expertly manipulated his gratitude into a lavish courtship. It questioned her background, her motives, and all but stated she was a gold digger of the highest order. Leopold's response was immediate and volcanic. He stormed into her apartment, his face a mask of cold fury, a tablet computer gripped in his hand. "This is Gregory Sable's doing," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "The man I ousted from the board. He cannot strike at me directly, so he is targeting what he perceives as my weakness. You." He threw the tablet onto her sofa, the screen displaying the vile article. "He is trying to undermine my judgment, to make me look a fool, and to drive you away." The violation was profound. Her private kindness, the most authentic moment of her life, had been twisted into a sordid tabloid narrative. The following days were worse. Whispers within Vance Industries, strategically leaked, suggested Elara was a destabilizing influence, that Leopold's focus was wavering at a critical time of corporate restructuring. She received a thinly veiled warning from one of his senior advisors, a man with a smile like a shard of ice, who suggested that for the stability of the company, and for her own peace, a discreet exit might be the most prudent course of action. The ugliness of the attack was a stark education in the realities of Leopold's kingdom. This was not a world of philosophical debates and art grants. It was a battlefield where love could be weaponized and compassion exploited as a fatal flaw. Elara retreated, the walls of her apartment feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a fragile bunker. She questioned everything. Was her presence truly a liability? Was the beautiful connection they had built nothing more than a target painted on his back and on her heart? The specter of Sable's betrayal forced them both to stare into the abyss of his world, and for the first time, Elara truly feared she might fall in. The poison of Gregory Sable's campaign seeped into the foundation of their newfound relationship, creating a palpable tension that neither could ignore. Elara found herself pulling away, her conversations with Leopold becoming guarded, her smiles strained. The fear that she was indeed a weakness, a distraction that could cause him genuine harm, was a constant, gnawing presence. She began to believe the most insidious lie of all, that leaving would be the ultimate act of love, a sacrifice to protect the man she cared for from the viper's nest his life entailed. Leopold watched this retreat with a growing, frantic desperation. He saw the light in her eyes dimming, the vibrant woman who debated philosophy with him being replaced by a cautious, wounded shadow. He could, and did, move with brutal efficiency on the corporate front. A series of calculated, devastating leaks to financial journals exposed the full extent of Sable's previous malfeasance, erasing his credibility and sending his allies scattering. The external threat was neutralized with the cold precision of a surgical strike, but this victory felt hollow. He had won the battle for his company, only to stand on the precipice of losing the war for her heart. He arrived at her apartment unannounced one evening, forgoing the car and the suit, dressed in the simple trousers and sweater he had worn at the cafe. He carried no gifts, no documents of victory. His face was stripped of its corporate armor, raw with an emotion far more powerful than anger. "Elara," he began, his voice thick, "I have spent my entire life building fortresses. Fortresses of wealth, of influence, of isolation. I believed they made me strong. Then I met you, and you showed me that true strength is not in walls, but in the courage to open a door." He stepped closer, his hands hanging emptily at his sides. "I do not want you to live in my gilded world. I want to build a new one with you. A world that has a garden in it, and the smell of your paints, and the sound of children laughing. I can silence my enemies, Elara. I can buy entire city blocks. But I cannot manufacture a single moment of the honesty you gave me that first night. That is the only currency I care about anymore." He was not commanding. He was pleading. He was offering her a partnership, not a position. He was acknowledging her fears not as weaknesses to be dismissed, but as valid concerns to be woven into the very fabric of their future. The choice was now irrevocably hers. Elara looked at him, this powerful, lonely man who was offering her his vulnerability as his ultimate promise. She saw the billionaire, the CEO, the strategist, and she saw Leo, the man from the rain. And she knew that sending him away would not protect him. It would only condemn them both to the very isolation they had both endured. The safe choice was to retreat. The brave choice was to step forward, not into his world, but into the new one he was proposing. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she crossed the room and placed her hand in his. "I am not afraid of your world, Leopold," she said, her voice steady. "I am only afraid of a world without you in it. We build it together." It was not a surrender. It was a covenant. The foundation they built was not laid with concrete and steel, but with intention and compromise. Their life became a beautiful, harmonious synthesis of two seemingly irreconcilable worlds. Leopold did not install Elara in his sterile penthouse as a treasured object dart. Instead, they found a home with a sprawling, sun-drenched conservatory where her plants thrived and a studio with northern light where her canvases quickly claimed every available surface. The silence of his previous existence was filled with the vibrant sounds of her life, the soft scratch of charcoal on paper, the murmur of the radio, her warm laughter echoing through the rooms. Leopold, in turn, brought his formidable intellect and resources to bear on a new purpose, one guided by her innate compassion. The Vance Foundation, once a largely impersonal corporate entity, was radically reshaped. Its new flagship initiative was the Kindness Studios, a network of community art centers for underserved youth, with the very first one breaking ground on the site of her old community garden. He did not merely sign the checks. He sat with her for hours, listening as she explained the psychological importance of natural light in a classroom, the need for accessible materials, the value of a welcoming atmosphere over an institutional one. Her insights became his corporate policy, her kindness the new compass point for his empire. Elara learned to navigate the formal galas not as an imposter, but as an ambassador. She wore exquisite gowns with her own handmade jewelry, a quiet statement of her identity. She refused to surrender. The society pages that once mocked her now spoke of her quiet elegance and genuine passion, but their opinion mattered little. What mattered was the quiet certainty she carried within, the knowledge that she was not Leopold Vance's accessory, but his partner. She was his refuge from the storm of his responsibilities, and he was the unwavering champion of her dreams. Years later, on a tranquil evening, they stood together in their conservatory. The city glittered below them, a kingdom he once ruled from a lonely throne. Now, he stood with his arm around her, watching as she absently wiped a smudge of cerulean blue paint from her wrist. A half-finished canvas stood on an easel nearby, a burst of joyful color. A financial report lay forgotten on a table beside his reading chair. They spoke in soft tones about the latest Kindness Studio opening, about a new philosopher he was reading, about the mundane and magnificent details of their shared life. The man who had everything had discovered he had nothing, until he found the one thing money could not buy. The woman who asked for nothing had received the one thing worth having. A love that honored her completely, a partnership that built a new world where both their souls could truly reside. They had found their way, not to a fairy tale ending, but to a rich, authentic beginning. Their lives a testament to a single act of kindness on a rainy night that forever changed the weather of their hearts. The end.